Picture this. It's the year 1995 AD. You're standing on a wooden ship with no roof, no walls, no heater. Around you, the North Atlantic stretches endlessly. A gray, churning monster of freezing water and bitter wind. Ice forms on the rigging. Sea spray crashes over the bow, drenching everything in salt water that's barely above freezing. Your breath comes out in clouds, and you're about to spend the next 7 days like this. Here's the impossible part. You're not just going to survive this journey, you're going to conquer it. You and 30 other warriors are sailing from Norway to Iceland in an open boat made of wood planks. No engine, no cabin to hide in, no Gore-Tex jackets or thermal underwear. Just wood, wool, and sheer Viking ingenuity. The Vikings didn't just make short coastal hops. They crossed 1,000 miles of open ocean, sailed through waters filled with icebergs, navigated channels where sea ice could form at any moment, and somehow their ships didn't turn into floating iceboxes. Their crews didn't freeze to death. In fact, they thrived enough to establish settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Today, we're solving one of history's most fascinating engineering mysteries. How did the Vikings build ships that could handle some of the most brutal conditions on Earth without modern technology? The answer isn't what you'd expect, and it involves everything from sheep breeding to revolutionary boat building techniques that modern engineers are still studying today. But before we dive in, I've got to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. Are you watching from somewhere cold like Oslo or Reykjavik? Or are you enjoying this from a warm beach somewhere? I'm genuinely curious to see how global this community is. Let's start by understanding exactly what the Vikings were up against. The North Atlantic Ocean during the Viking Age, roughly 790 to 1100 AD, was not a friendly place. Water temperatures hovered around 0 degrees Celsius, right at the freezing point. That alongside with the wind, and you have a lethal combination that pulls heat from the human body at a terrifying rate. Here's the science. Water conducts heat away from your body 25 times faster than air. When that water is near freezing and you're in a moving boat with wind whipping across wet surfaces, hypothermia can set in within minutes. Modern shipping and fishing vessels have heated cabins, engine rooms that radiate warmth, insulated walls. The Vikings had none of this. Their ships were completely open to the elements. Imagine a giant wooden canoe, between 50 and 115 feet long, with a single square sail and rows of
Brace
oars.
for impact!
No
Hold
deck
the line!
below to shelter in.
Secure
No
the
galley
bow,
with a
quickly!
warm stove.
We need to turn her
Everything
into the
you
wind.
got wet.
Brace for
Everything stayed
impact!
wet.
Hold the
And
line!
yet, the sagas tell
Secure
us
the
of
bow,
routine
quickly!
voyages that
We
sound
need to
almost
turn her
casual.
into the wind.
The voyage from Norway
Brace
to
for
Iceland,
impact!
about
Hold the
900
line!
nautical miles, was
Secure
normally
the bow,
completed
quickly!
in a fortnight. Some extraordinary crossings took less than a week. Merchants made this journey annually, waiting through winter before making the return trip. But here's what really blows my mind. Modern researchers built replica Viking ships and sailed them across the North Atlantic using only traditional techniques. They discovered something shocking. In 2007, a 98-foot replica called the Sea Stallion sailed from Denmark to Dublin and back over 2,000 miles using only Viking navigation methods. The crew reported that the ship flexed and moved in ways that seemed terrifying at first, but somehow it worked. The researchers faced another danger the Vikings would have known intimately: ice accumulation. When fog, freezing rain, or sea spray hits a ship's surface in sub-freezing conditions, ice forms. It adds weight rapidly. A ship can become top-heavy and unstable. It can slow down or sit dangerously low in the water. During particularly harsh conditions, ice from fog alone can coat a vessel in hours. The Baltic Sea, where many Vikings sailed, could freeze completely during severe winters. The ice season ran from late October to early June. Even the Oslo fjord could be blocked by ice for extended periods. And when Vikings ventured into the true Arctic waters around Greenland, they encountered not just freezing temperatures, but massive icebergs calving from glaciers carried south by the North Atlantic current. So here's our mystery.
Brace for
How did the
impact.
Vikings
Hold the
not only
line.
survive these conditions,
Secure
but
the
thrive
bow
in them?
quickly.
How did their
We need
ships
to turn
resist
her
ice
into the
formation,
wind.
stay flexible
Brace
enough
for
to handle
impact.
massive
Hold
waves,
the line.
keep crews warm enough
Secure
to
the
function,
bow
and
quickly.
remain seaworthy
We need
for
to turn
decades?
her into the
The
wind.
answer lies in a combination of brilliant engineering, innovative materials, and survival strategies that would make modern engineers jealous. Let's start with the ships themselves. The secret to Viking ships starts with a building technique called clinker construction, or lap straight building. Instead of placing wooden planks edge to edge like modern boats, the Vikings overlapped each plank like the shingles on a roof. Each plank's bottom edge sat on top of the plank below it. Why does this matter when it comes to ice and cold? For three revolutionary reasons. First, water resistance. Those overlapping planks created a natural barrier system. When waves crashed against the hull or sea spray hit the sides, the overlapping pattern diverted water away from the interior. It worked like natural house siding, shedding water before it could penetrate. The ship stayed drier inside, which meant less water to freeze and less cold, wet wood sucking heat from the crew. Second, flexibility. This is the game changer. Unlike rigid, frame-first ships, clinker-built vessels were incredibly flexible. The planks were fastened with iron rivets through the overlaps, but these connections allowed the wood to move slightly. Modern sailors who've crewed replica of Viking ships describe watching the bow and stern twist in opposite directions by up to 20 inches as they ride over swells. Sleeping on long voyages, Vikings used two-person sleeping bags made of sheepskin and animal hides. Two people sharing body heat in an insulated bag could survive nights that would kill a person sleeping alone. They understood collective warmth. When the crew huddled together during the worst weather, they created warm pockets of higher temperature zones that helped everyone stave off hypothermia. Here's where wool became absolutely critical. The sails. Viking sails weren't made of linen or canvas like you might expect. They were made entirely of wool, and producing one of these sails was an undertaking so massive it's hard to comprehend. A single 100 square meter sail, about 1/4 the size of a basketball court, big enough for a 30-meter longship, required 2 tons of fleece. That's the annual production of about 700 sheep. Researchers calculated that by the mid-11th century, the Viking fleet carried roughly 1 million square meters of sail, requiring wool from about 2 million sheep annually. One sail took about 8,000 hours of work, roughly 4.5 modern working years. The process started in springtime when families rued the wool, pulling naturally shedding fleece from the sheep rather than shearing it. The outer guard hairs were separated from the inner wool, taking 3 to 4 people up to 6 months. Then came spinning, 165,000 meters of yarn for a single sail, taking another 6 months. The warp yarn used long guard hairs, spun tight with a Z twist. The weft yarn was softer, twisted from hair and short fibers. This required incredible skill, being able to create different types of yarn for different structural purposes. Weaving came next, done on an upright warp-weighted loom using a 2-to-1 twill pattern. The weave was phenomenally tight, 20 to 23 threads per inch in the warp, 10 to 15 picks per inch in the weft. If you know anything about weaving, you'll understand this is exceptional craftsmanship, especially with sticky wool fibers. But even after weaving this massive piece of fabric, the Vikings weren't done. The sail had to be waterproofed and made airtight. They used a process called smoring. First, they rubbed a mixture of horse fat, specifically from under the mane, water, and ochre into the fabric. Then they applied coats of hot liquid beef tallow. Some sources mention seal tar, produced by melting seal blubber and wind drying it in skin sacks. This treatment did multiple things simultaneously. The fats created a smoothing, water-repellent layer. The ochre, a type of clay, plugged remaining gaps in the weave while also acting as an antibacterial agent to prevent the sail from rotting when wet. The result was a sail that could catch wind efficiently, resist tearing in gales, and shed water like a duck's back. When properly cared for, these wool sails could last for upwards of 50 years. Compare that to linen sails, which were more brittle and would rip apart in the kind of gales Vikings routinely encountered. The stretchy, resilient nature of wool meant the sail could flex with the wind rather than fighting against it. Before we continue, here's a question that genuinely fascinates me. Do you think you could have survived as a Viking? Not the raiding and fighting part. I mean the everyday reality of living in open boats, working with these materials, enduring the cold. Be honest in the comments. I think most of us, myself included, would struggle hard with those conditions. Now, here's something crucial. The Vikings weren't just tough, they were smart. Really smart. They understood something modern researchers have only recently confirmed. Timing was everything. The prevailing myth is that Vikings were savage warriors who blindly battled through cold, fog, wind, and turbulence. But recent scientific research by Professors William Doolittle and Stephen Stadler completely dismantles this narrative. After studying climatological data and even sailing the North Atlantic themselves in summer, they discovered the Vikings had it figured out. North Atlantic winds are generally westerly, driven by two systems: the clockwise circulation around the Azores subtropical high and the counterclockwise circulation around the Icelandic low. In winter, the pressure gradient between these systems peaks, creating wind speeds of 10 to 20 knots, driving treacherous waves that could swamp a Viking ship's low sides. But in summer, everything changes. The pressure gradient drops dramatically, creating relatively slow southwesterly winds with few strong disturbances. Temperatures during the Viking settlement period were well above normal. This was during the medieval warm period. Sea ice was minimal. The waters had reliable, even calm sailing conditions with good visibility during warm summer months. Here's the brilliant part. Vikings didn't just wake up one day and sail to North America. They spent 200 years discovering and settling one island at a time. First the Shetland Islands around 800 AD, then the Faroe Islands, Iceland by 860, Greenland by 900, and finally Newfoundland around 1021. By the time they reached North America, they had intimate knowledge of North Atlantic geography, including all the islands, the waters between them, and the regional weather patterns. They became masters of reading the weather. Vikings could forecast short-term weather by observing clouds, winds, and the behavior of seabirds. Given that sailing distances between islands were only 25 to 38 hours, their ability to predict weather for the next day or two was sufficient for safe passage. Their cargo ships, called nars, were specifically designed for these conditions. They were slow but highly maneuverable, which made avoiding icebergs and ice floes relatively simple. These vessels were about 54 feet long with a 15-foot beam, sturdy by design, and depended mostly on sail power, only using oars when there was no wind. For warmth and food, Vikings used central hearths on their longships. These weren't large fires. Remember, everything was made of wood and coated in flammable materials like tar and animal fats. But a small, carefully controlled fire in a stone, unclosed area provided crucial warmth and allowed them to cook meals twice daily during normal voyages near shores where they could collect and boil fresh water. The bulk of heat came from the Vikings themselves. Their active lifestyle, rowing, adjusting sails, maintaining the ship, kept their bodies generating warmth. Combined with their layered wool clothing, collective body heat in tight quarters, and strategic breaks from rowing every 2 hours, they created a survival system that worked. But they weren't invincible. The sagas tell honestly of ships that set out from port and were never seen again. Sailors experienced havfilla, bewilderment or confusion caused by thick clouds and fog. Without clear skies, they could completely lose their sense of direction. It's entirely possible that Bjarni Herjolfsson, the first Viking to sight North America, only did so because he was blown off course while heading to Greenland. When things went wrong, ships faced specific dangers. Bjarni's ship, according to Eirik's Saga Ra, became infested with sea worms on the return from Vinland, making it unseaworthy. The ship's boat survived because it had been smeared with tar made from seal blubber, which prevented worm infestation. Another example of Vikings understanding their materials. The clinker-built design made repairs relatively easy, which was critical. Damaged planks could be replaced without endangering the entire structure. Vikings could conduct field repairs in harsh conditions using the same materials they built with: oak planks, iron rivets, pine tar, animal hair caulking. That flexibility we discussed earlier, it had another crucial benefit. When ice did form on the rigging or deck during particularly cold passages, the ship's constant flexing and movement helped dislodge it before dangerous accumulation occurred. The evenly distributed flexibility through clinch pins, wooden rivets, and compass timbers meant no single point would break first. The whole ship moved as a unit. Quick question for you. If you had to cross the Atlantic in a Viking ship versus a modern cruise ship, which would you choose and why? I know the obvious answer is cruise ship. Duh. But imagine the cruise ship has no engine and you have a skilled Viking crew. Does that change your answer? Drop your thoughts below. So let's bring this all together. Why didn't Viking ships turn into floating iceboxes? Because the Vikings engineered a complete survival system that worked on multiple levels simultaneously. Layer 1. Ship design. Clinker construction created flexible, water-shedding vessels that could handle massive waves without accumulating ice. The overlapping planks diverted water, while the flexibility prevented stress fractures and ice buildup. Oak wood cut with the grain provided strength with bend. Tar and natural fiber caulking sealed gaps while maintaining flexibility in cold temperatures. Layer 2. Material science. Wool from specially-bred Nordic short-tail sheep provided clothing and sails that were simultaneously waterproof and insulating. Lanolin-rich fibers repelled water while the crimped structure trapped warm air. Multiple layers sealed at pressure points created effective insulation systems. Two-person sleeping bags utilized shared body heat. Layer 3. Intelligent timing. Vikings sailed during summer months when the North Atlantic was calm and relatively warm. They avoided winter when the polar front jet stream generated dangerous cyclones. They island hopped over 200 years, learning each route thoroughly before attempting the next. They used local knowledge of currents, landmarks, and wildlife to navigate safely. Modern researchers continue to be amazed by Viking ingenuity. When the Sea Stallion sailed from Roscoe to Dublin in 2007 to 2008, the crew discovered that after just a few voyages in rough North Sea and Celtic Sea conditions, they began to understand why Vikings built the way they did. The ship's flexibility was initially terrifying, but ultimately proved essential to its survival. The sophistication of Viking textile production alone was staggering. By the mid-11th century, producing sails for the entire Viking fleet would have required coordinated wool production across thousands of farms, specialized breeding programs, and organized labor systems involving entire communities working for years on single projects. In 2021, UNESCO added Nordic clinker boat traditions to its list of intangible cultural heritage, recognizing these techniques as valuable knowledge humanity should preserve. The clinker method is still used today for small wooden vessels, especially sea-going dinghies that need to be light enough to move and store easily. Viking innovations influence modern design in unexpected ways. Their understanding of flexibility in harsh conditions informs everything from oil platform engineering in the North Sea to cold weather survival gear. Modern outdoor enthusiasts still use beeswax and lanolin to treat leather and wool, just like the Vikings did. Standing in a museum looking at a preserved Viking ship like the Gokstad or the Osberg, it's easy to see them as primitive, just wooden boats. But when you understand what they represented, the cumulative knowledge of generations, the coordinated labor of entire societies, the deep understanding of materials and environment, you realize you're looking at high technology. These were the spaceships of the 10th century. The Vikings didn't conquer the North Atlantic through brute force. They conquered it through observation, innovation, community cooperation, and respect for the environment they operated in. Every element of their system, from sheep breeding to ship construction to sailing tactics, was optimized for survival in some of the harshest conditions humans have ever voluntarily entered. So the next time you think about those primitive Vikings in their open wooden boats, Remember, they crossed an ocean that still kills modern sailors in metal ships with engines and GPS. They did it in boats that flexed like living things, wearing wool that could keep you alive in freezing water, using sails that took years to make and could last half a century. They didn't turn into iceboxes because they understood something we're only now learning. Sometimes the best technology isn't the newest or most complex. Sometimes it's the most thoughtful. Final question for you all. What other historical survival mystery would you like me to dive into next? Ancient navigation techniques? Medieval castle heating? How the Polynesians crossed the Pacific? Let me know in the comments. And if you learned something new today, which I hope you did, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep explorations into history's greatest engineering mysteries. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious, and remember, those primitive ancestors of ours were pretty damn brilliant.